Schlepping around deadly toxic fumes with a crystal bucket does not sound like anyone's idea of a fun time. 16 years ago, however, that was exactly what I was doing with my little cousins while playing Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on the Nintendo GameCube. Granted, being tasked as the group's bucket boy was the least fun aspect of playing the game. Then again, given all the technical and logistical hoops that Crystal Chronicles required you to jump over in order to enjoy a multiplayer session, and I'm still honestly amazed by how much we ended up enjoying the game. To this day, those multiplayer sessions remain a wonderful spring memory for everyone involved, even as we've all grown up a bit older and perhaps just a wee bit wiser. It's an experience that veterans of the game get to relive once again with the release of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition. Unlike the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Crystal Chronicles Remastered is not a new, reimagined take on the classic. For fans of the original, this is the old game that everyone knows and loves, brought back with higher resolution visuals as well as some extra new features to help freshen up the experience. Older gamers who were around during the game's release will remember it as a big deal back then. The first Final Fantasy game to be released on a Nintendo home console since developer Square moved the franchise to Sony systems. Despite not being a numbered entry in the mainline series, Crystal Chronicles was still a big deal. Back then, it represented hope that Final Fantasy games could show up regularly on Nintendo systems once more. Now, while the game's narrative was not as fleshed out as those of the mainline Final Fantasy games, it would also be a mistake to say that Crystal Chronicles was not story-driven. Underneath its cute-looking characters and charming designs is a sinister, encroaching darkness that literally permeates throughout its world. The effects of this dark miasma is evident throughout the game's various landscapes, which is littered with the scars of the past. From once lush forests that have been left to rot to previously bustling towns now reduced to shadows of their past glory, there's a heavy sense of death and despair that lingers all over Crystal Chronicles' world. Amidst all of this darkness, however, are pockets of hope. These include the town of Tipa, one of a few remaining outposts blessed with a giant crystal fragment that wards off the deadly miasma that envelopes the world. The giant crystal's protection, however, is not absolute. Once a year, their purifying powers need to be recharged with a special essence known as myrrh, which can only be harvested from special trees. To procure the special substance, each town sends out a caravan of its citizens to brave the miasma and find myrrh trees to harvest. In Crystal Chronicles, you play as the characters in one of those caravans. You'll start out by picking one of the 4 races, the Clavat, Lilty, Selkie, and Yuk. Or is it Yuki? The Clavat boasts all-around proficiency, excelling in both melee and magic combat. Lilty, on the other hand, are great with physical attacks despite their small stature. Members of the Selkie tribe specialize in speed as well as focus attacks. Last but not least are the Yuki, who are physically weak but excel in casting spells. In addition to picking a character, you can also pick one of 8 occupations for your family. Each comes with special benefits that grant you special materials, gear, or recipes, as well as discounts for services. To get those perks, you will need to improve your relationship with your family members by sending them letters and items throughout your journey. Helpful occupations include blacksmith, merchant, tailor, and alchemist. Even if you just use one main character, it's a good idea to create 8 characters representing each of the 8 jobs so you can access their services in your hometown. Now, in addition to the original character designs from the GameCube version, the remaster adds one new male and female option to choose from. It's just one of several new features that were added to the re-release that fans will likely appreciate. The remaster, for example, also adds voice acting, which is used for narration and dialogue during cutscenes and other key parts of the story.
Hail, fellow caravaner! You are the caravan from that village, are you not? I heard they were sending out a new caravan. You seem quite capable.
As someone who played the original, I was actually surprised the first time I heard one of the NPCs actually speaking, which I thought was a nice touch. The remaster also throws in a new mimic function that allows players to assume the look of certain non-playable characters, such as Andy, the Black Knight, and Gertie, and even characters from other Square Enix games such as Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Echoes of Time and My Life as a King. This can be done by using special memory crystals, which can be acquired from sources such as hidden Moogle nests, for example. The remaster even adds several new post-game dungeons, new bosses, and new gear as an extra treat, something that fans of the original will likely appreciate. The improvements also apply to the combat, which gets some needed improvements. The biggest one is the addition of a new magic timer for spell fusions when playing with other people. In the original, timing spell fusions in order to cast more powerful magic was a bit of a pain, which led to a lot of missed fusions instead. In the remaster, overlapping compatible spells bring up a new timing wheel that makes it easier to pull off higher level magic. In one 3-player session I took part in during the review period, for example, I was able to successfully pull off fusion spells with a random player several times in a row, despite not having voice chat enabled between the both of us. It's a big change from the original, where fusing spells with other players was a constant source of frustration, even though those players were sitting right next to me. Speaking of playing with random players, one new feature that's literally a game changer is the addition of online multiplayer with crossplay to boot. This can be done by sharing your session ID with friends, sending an invite code, or doing a quick match with randoms via the Set Out Together option on the game menu. One of the best parts about the new online feature is the ability to use just one paid copy of the game for 4 players. To do this, the other 3 players just need to download the light version of the game for free. As long as one of the players owns the full version, the others can play through the whole game in multiplayer. This is especially great for family and friends who have different systems but might not necessarily want to shell out extra dollars to get 4 copies of the game. It's definitely cheaper than the old GameCube setup, which required me to get additional Game Boy Advance systems and link cables for my cousins, just so we could play multiplayer. It basically solves one of my biggest gripes about the original game, which was the cost of doing multiplayer, and also having to put our sessions on hold when one of us ran out of batteries for our Game Boy, which essentially served as a multiplayer controller. Now, while I enjoyed the new additions to the game, one change proved to be a bit of a bummer. That would be the loss of local or couch co-op by using just one system. The main reason cited for the removal of this feature was how unwieldy co-op would have been if everyone shared the same screen and needed to open menus mid-battle. While the concern is understandable, I still would have preferred a less elegant local multiplayer experience than having no local co-op at all. Online play, meanwhile, is limited to dungeons and can only be done one dungeon at a time. This means other players can't visit towns together with you, and your only option for continued play is to rerun the same dungeon you started the session with. Another downside is that story progression in multiplayer sessions is limited to the host player. Some of the game's older mechanics also haven't quite aged well. Regular melee attacks, for example, felt a bit underwhelming, while spell fusion with your partner Moogle during solo play is also finicky and frustrating a lot of times. My old frustrations with Moogle body painting, which is necessary to make your partner Moogle perform the elemental spell you want, also remain. Painting and washing off your Moogle just feels more cumbersome than it should be, and I wish it was quicker and easier. Many times, I also found myself outrunning the camera and not being able to see my character clearly on the map. Then there's the infamous bucket carrying mechanic, which also makes a return, basically interrupting the flow of the action. For those unfamiliar with the original game, you basically need to walk around with a purifying container to avoid damage from the miasma. It's not too bad when playing solo, as your Moogle companion can take over bucket carrying duty. In online play, however, one of the players has to carry the chalice, which slows down the carrying player's movement while also preventing them from fighting. That is, unless they drop the bucket. Granted, there's really not much that the remaster could do about this, because it's a key mechanic of the original game. At the same time, it doesn't really make it any less annoying than it was back then. Anyway, what are my final thoughts about Crystal Chronicles Remastered? When Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles first came out, I found its concept to be quite fascinating. Boasting 4-player co-op and gear-based progression, it basically played like an online action RPG, except without the online part. Since then, online play on home consoles have changed from being more of a novelty to pretty much being standard fare these days. It also makes the Crystal Chronicles Remaster the definitive version of the game. There's just something about being able to finally play the game online that just feels right. As someone who remembers playing the original Crystal Chronicles, I'm surprised about how well the game holds up after more than a decade and a half. Admittedly, some aspects of its visuals and mechanics do feel dated, and schlepping around on bucket duty can be a pain. Overall, however, the game remains fun to play, especially when doing so with other people. Add several new features and content as well as online play, and there's definitely something here for newcomers and Crystal Chronicles veterans alike. I especially like how the remake actually adds several new features instead of limiting itself to a simple visual upgrade. Granted, it might be a harder sell for newer players, but for fans of the original, this is certainly a welcome addition. Here's hoping that it does well enough to encourage Square Enix to make a new modern entry in the series. As always, if you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. This is Tabi Asobi, and thank you for watching.